Thank you guys for inviting me to speak about my work, and thanks for that great introduction. So before I begin, I just want to share a little bit about myself and a little bit about how my work is framed to kind of give you some background. So as mentioned, I have a background in computer science, and much of my work is viewing the ways that we can use technologies to address social issues. And so the way that I approach research questions is that I apply social science theories from psychology and sociology to understand communities. And by communities, I'm referring to place-based spaces, geographically bound spaces. And I tend to focus on middle to lower income communities. And the goal is there to understand what's the role of technology in addressing some social issues that these communities face. So my work is kind of situated at the intersection of that. And so today I'm going to be talking about two different studies that I have. And just to let you know, the main theme of my work is really understanding how can we co-design policies, practices, and technologies with residents in resource-constrained communities by focusing on the assets that are located in those communities. And specifically by assets, I mean like human assets, environmental assets, social and economic capital. All of that can be leveraged as we design these things. So in this talk, like I said, I'm going to really focus on two projects where we take an asset-based approach to designing for violence prevention and designing STEM spaces for underrepresented girls. And so if people have questions, you can kind of stop, particularly questions around clarification. Just feel free to stop me, and I'll take questions to clarify. And then longer questions can be asked at the end. Okay, so as I said before, much of my work is focused on communities or neighborhoods. And you may wonder why the focus on neighborhoods in particular. And so the main reason, there's two main reasons for that. The first reason is neighborhoods have this opportunity to provide this rich context where people use technologies, particularly information and communication technologies. It's this opportunity to understand relationship building and social networks in a local context and how people use technologies to kind of facilitate that. And also how people understand places and spaces within neighborhoods. And then secondly, neighborhoods play this really critical role in our lives, in all of our lives. So where you grew up and where you grow up actually has a big impact on your future. More simply put, it influences your health, educational opportunities. It has an influence on your economic status, mortality, and safety. And so it's really important as we begin to think about designing technologies, because I'm in the technology field, how can ICTs or technologies have this ability to kind of strengthen neighborhoods, right? By supporting residents, their collective actions, and their responses to social issues. And this is particularly really important in resource-constrained neighborhoods where you may find issues such as poverty and high unemployment, crime, lack of educational opportunities, inadequate housing, all of those things. So it's really important for us to understand how can we leverage technology to support residents collectively addressing this. And as a researcher, for me, I have had this really unique opportunity to examine and explore and design technologies that positively impact local communities. And I've been doing that here in Chicago for the last a little over a decade. So just to give you more background about my field, so for decades, scholars in my field have really recognized, and my field is in human-computer interaction, recognized the importance of understanding technology and the use of local settings. So they cover such issues such as collective information sharing, social capital, even more recently in low SES communities, really thinking about economic and environmental development, sustainability, health, etc. And so those those studies have focused on resource-constrained neighborhoods. And so you may say, well, why resource-constrained neighborhoods? Or what do you mean by that? And I'm referring to, like I said, geographically bound spaces that have faced disparities historically, such as issues like concentrated poverty and low household incomes and lack of access to health care and educational opportunities. And so the research shows that technology has this potential to worsen inequities and not necessarily help inequities. And this is a quote from, one of my favorite scholars at Northwestern, Brent Heck, who finished with me, and his colleagues, and their work really suggests that more affluent neighborhoods benefit most from the sharing economy, which is, a really popular way that we use technology now, and that based on new technologies, it really suggests that participation should be for all, and that we have this opportunity that technology could actually improve neighborhoods, but in actuality, what we're finding is that it's not. And so again, that kind of gives you a setting for why I do the type of work that I do. And the fact that I design with residents in resource constrained neighborhoods, focusing on their assets. So what do I mean by assets? So there's two ways that you can think about designing technologies with communities, I should say. You could design it for communities, and many times we take a deficit approach. And what does a deficit approach look like? It looks like addressing problems. And so here's an example of what that looks like, right? Where you talk about and you focus specifically on the issues of unemployment. You focus specifically on gangs, and you focus specifically on things that typically have a negative impact within these communities. On the flip side, an asset-based approach is taking the opposite, where it's really thinking about what are the physical assets, what are the human assets, what's the human capital that's there already in the community, and how can we leverage that? This is not a new thing. I didn't create it, right? It comes historically from the asset-based community development work by John McKnight and his colleagues. And they really think about the institutions that are there, so businesses, parks, hospitals, community colleges, libraries, and schools. No matter what the neighborhood looks like, it probably has those institutions in place. Then it has something called citizen institutions or associations, and those associations are things like churches and block clubs and your grandma's sewing club and the book club and cultural groups, etc. And then you have like gifts or human capital, right? And so those are from individuals. So sometimes that can be money, but other times that could be like, this person's a really great babysitter, or they're really good at talking, or the youth themselves have a lot of energy. The elderly have a lot of wisdom. We have artists, etc. So these are some examples here. So the question is, and the way that I approach my work is, can we take assets? Can we look at assets and build technologies based on these assets, despite some of the deficits that others have focused on, or some of the deficits that plague the community, right? That have led to issues within the community. So the two projects that I'm going to focus on is, one is designing technologies to support violence interruption. And I have to say that this work is done with me, and I have a great graduate student, Jessa Dickinson, and an army of students in the Technology for Social Good lab, which is a lab that I co-direct. And that's them at the bottom, or that's some of them. There are lots missing who worked on this project with me. At the top is actually our partner, Jalen Author, who was formerly at Cure Violence, and now he is Director of Strategic Priorities at Chicago Cred, which is an organization that focuses on economic development as a way and means for to address violence prevention. And so that's my team. I got to give them credit. And then that's them when they're acting really silly, which we do a lot, right? We handle heavy issues, so that's them. They'll be embarrassed that I showed that image. All right. So I partnered with Jalen Author, right? So we met and we talked, and this is when he was at Cure Violence. Cure Violence is a teaching, training, research, and asset assessment nonprofit organization, and it's situated at University of Illinois Chicago, UIC. And what they do is they take a public approach to violence interruption. They've been around for about maybe 20 years, thereabout. Cure Violence, they view violence as an infectious disease or a health issue, and they consider the contagion of violence, meaning the different levels of violence and its increased exposure. So, for example, if you were exposed to violence as a child, you're more likely to be violent to someone else. So, and those are facts. So, and they take that as a way, the same way that epidemiologists in public health would address another disease. That's how they do it. And so there's 3 steps to it. One is you detect and interrupt potentially violent conflicts. 2, you identify and treat high-risk individuals. So you provide them with the tools that they need. And then you mobilize the community to kind of change the norms around violence. So this is a very health-based model that's been used in more than 60 communities in 25 cities in the U.S. and 8 countries: Canada, Honduras, South Africa, Syria, to name a few. And Cure Violence programming has been kind of implanted in a range of settings, and that includes communities and in hospitals and schools and prisons, etc. And they've been quite effective via independent assessment of the organization. So Cure Violence, what they do is they hire violence interrupters, and that's the group of folks that I was working with. And interrupters to mediate violent conflicts on the street. And these interrupters are actually from the community. They have street cred, right? They lived, meaning that they have been involved in conflicts themselves in the past. Many of them have been formerly incarcerated, or they've been involved in gangs or cliques, which I will refer to as groups from here on out. And the interrupters, they are trained at UIC in the School of Public Health on how to address violence. And that's their job, right? And they're paid to do that. So this means that they find people who are about to retaliate, or someone who is about to use a gun, or people who are engaged in domestic violence, and they mediate the situation, and they successfully kind of stop people from engaging in violence as it happens. And then after that, you have outreach workers, right? That's step 2. After that, you have outreach workers that reach out to high-risk individuals, and they provide access to jobs and educational opportunities, counseling, because some people have been through very traumatic experiences, to kind of help them in the long term. So there's a long-term plan after they've been engaged in that. And the outreach workers are there for a longer period of time. So they might work with people for 6 months or longer. And then there are also the organization, including the interrupters and the outreach workers. They also engage in other activities within the community to try to reduce this normalization of violence within the community. So we go back to, that's the organization that we're working with, right? And we're designing a technology to support these interrupters. And so we go back to this, which I originally showed, this map of what are the assets. So what do you think are the assets of a community-based violence prevention program? Any guesses? Other than I just showed you the answer. So they're in schools. So these violence interrupters are in schools. They're integrated into the schools. It could be a principal that calls their organization and lets them know people are outside, and I've heard something, or one of the kids came to me and told me that there's some beef, and these guys will go to the schools or outside the schools and talk to the kids and et cetera, right? They're integrated into hospitals, so when someone is typically shot, they're there to kind of talk to the family, because they need to know if someone is going to retaliate, and many times that's kind of how things start for them. They're integrated into other local social organizations like churches. The youth, they're walking the block, they're walking the street, they're integrated into the block club and have relatively good relationships with the police. And also other people, right? Other people who may be labeled as in groups or gangs or et cetera. So these local violence prevention organizations have relationships in places that, we may not even think about or realize. One of the things that I want to say is that, in particular, they are have these incredible skills that come from their lived experiences, and particularly for them to be able to negotiate in very high stakes situations where there's a gun on scene and they don't have a gun, right? And so where they're talking someone off who's very angry from using their gun, right? Or being able to console a mother or a father for the loss of their child, right? And trying to calm the family down. So these folks, while we may not look at them as people who may have these skills, right? If you think about traditionally, if you think about the deficit approach, they may be a statistic or, they were involved, so they're part of the statistics. But in actuality, that there are lots of assets that they have and that they have learned how to have over the course of their lived experience. Yeah. So we decided that working with them would be ideal when we think about taking an asset-based approach. So the project objective was, how can we design technologies that support and amplify efforts of cure violence interrupters across the city of Chicago? And there were three main goals for the project. One was to support violence interruption training. Two was to encourage the use of different interruption strategies. So there's 13 different strategies that the UIC and the School of Public Health, when they are trained, that they use. But we wanted to make sure that they're used, and there's a database that keeps track of all the mediations that they do. And so we wanted to see if they were using the breadth of those 13 strategies. And then we wanted to make it easier for interrupters to, and outreach workers to connect with each other and become a community. So so what we did was, we first started by interviewing them and spending time there to try to understand what are the features if we created a technology to support them while they do their field work. And was there actually a need for technology? So while I'm a computer scientist, I don't actually believe in building something that's not needed. And so we did a lot of preliminary interviews with the interrupters first. And so here's some initial screenshots of the app that we ended up building for them. So this is a home screen. It has violence, it has a mediation guide. So all of them, they all have to keep track of all of their mediation. So it provides access to that. It provides a quick, refresher on the different strategies, the 13 strategies. They are dealing with very high stakes, very stressful situations. And so there's also self-care tips, videos, really short videos, not that we made, but that the other interrupters made. So we had videos made and created by the interrupters and the trainers who are in the field. And then we had statistics on their own mediations as well as their team mediations. We also had a mediation feature. This mediation feature kind of relays where they had the ability to put in the type of conflict that they were experiencing. So some conflicts happen very quickly, right? They're on the street, someone starts fighting. They're there. If they're around, and they'll stop it, right? And for this feature, they wouldn't necessarily use that. But a lot of times when they're mediating, it happens over a period of time, right? And it could be a retaliation, which could stew over days, or some gang beef, which may happen, or or a beef between two gangs, which may happen over a week or 2 weeks, et cetera. And so the mediate feature, it allows them to put in these parameters, and based on data that the Cure Violence, based on former data from their database on what was the most effective strategies, this tool provides them with the most effective strategies, as well as the people, other interrupters, connect them with other interrupters who have faced these particular situations and have successfully mediated them using some algorithms that we created. There's also a connect feed, and this is to allow violence prevention workers across the city of Chicago to connect with one another, and they can post pictures and videos and chat via private message, etc. There's also a training room, so they created training videos. The trainers and some of the interrupters created training videos to kind of do a little quick, like 30-second refresher to refresh them on the different mediation strategies, the 13 mediation strategies. There's an alert feature that the interrupter said that they wanted, which was where situations really escalate really quickly. Sometimes they can escalate very quickly, and you don't really have time to call your team and tell your whole site to come to help out. And so the alert feature kind of enables this on the spot. It takes 2 clicks to open up the app and then press send. And then it would send an emergency text message to your team as well as headquarters if you'd like, to alert them of where you are, your current location, and that there's an emergency. So we deployed the app over a course of 3 months, April to June. We deployed it with 3 different organizations: Cure Violence, UCAN, and Target. Those are 3 violence prevention organizations. And we did it in 6 different sites, 6 different neighborhoods throughout Chicago. And it was kind of a long study from the initial interviews in 2016 all the way until, we finished the study in 2018 to data analysis, which was finished kind of at the end of last year. It took a little while. So to kind of lay out the methods, we had to build relationships and rapport with the interrupters as well as the organizations for them to get buy-in. And that took a while. And then once we were deployed the app, we did field studies where we went out to sites. We did interviews with the interrupters. We had a case of interrupters, 3 or 4 from each site that we interviewed during the deployment, during the 3-month deployment, to understand how the app was working and how it was supporting their work. We did pre and post interviews with everyone at the entire site, whether they use the app or not. We have log data from the app usage. So every click, every usage, every time it was open, we have that and how it was used. And then using a triangulated method, we analyze the data qualitatively and quantitatively, using inductive qualitative analysis and then using statistical analysis to understand across sites, within a site, how was it used. Okay, 6 sites, remember that. Okay, so what we found was, for the surveys, we had 56 survey respondents, so 56 across all the sites. We had, in total, we had like 70 something, right? But people who did the pre and the post, in total, it was 56. 34 said that they actually used the app. Let's see, let me go back. Yeah, 34 said that they actually used the app. 22 people did not use the app. So we had like a 60-something percent, 66%. People who didn't use the app said that, it's because they had an iPhone. We built it for the Android because that's what most people use. Now we have an iPhone version, but not during the deployment. Usage was not required. Some people said it was confusing. Well, yeah. And then some people said they had a technical problem or something. So the results of the study was that the app did seem to increase social capital across sites. Within sites, so within a site, these are folks who meet, who work together daily. They are a team. They work together on all of these conflicts pretty regularly. So within a team, there was already strong social capital and strong relationships amongst the team members. But outside of the team, people didn't know each other as much across the city. And so we found that it increases the social capital, or the amount of people who are connected across the city. And that's within site. So if you look, that's within site. So if you look, when we asked the question about how frequent did you contact people outside of or across the site, the people who use the app, it actually increased more. It trended pretty closely to significance, but we need more data. 34 is a pretty small number. And then if you look at from other violence organizations, so One group could be from Cure Violence, but there could be multiple sites of Cure Violence. But then there's sometimes that there are other groups. So I showed you UCAN and Target, et cetera. So organizations all across sites, they seem to connect more, the people who use it. The people who used it also connected with each other more via the site. So you saw lots of people saying that they use the method that they use to connect. They use the app to connect with each other. So it increased social capital in that way. As far as the log data goes, we had, even though 34 people said they used it, the log data shows that it's 40 people who used it. And we had 40 mediations, and those are the mediations that I said before. There were almost 300 posts of people kind of sharing what they're doing. They shared events. There's lots of social media type posts within the app, and almost half of those posts received a response. And then there were 29 one-on-one messages. One-on-one conversations between folks who were started. So the alert feature was used pretty frequently when we asked people, well, how did they use it? There was not actually an emergency, but people like to test it. So they were testing it out. Well, thank goodness there wasn't an alert. There wasn't a need to use the alert feature while we were testing it out, but there was lots of usage via the log data. When we analyzed the interview data, there are 4 main findings. One is that participants really liked being able to alert their team. That part was really strong. Someone said, if there's something that was happening and I wanted to warn my coworkers where I was at, I could say, oh, this is where I'm at and I'm headed over here, and they would get that immediately, right? So people cared about their safety, and being able to do that was a great feature. Participants enjoyed the social media feature. They enjoyed that a lot. We watched them talk back and forth, and it was pretty entertaining. He said, I love the app. I'm saying the app is going to help me from saying inspire other people. You can say communicate with these people much more from the app, right? So he's talking about communicating across sites. The social media feature also helped create this sense of unity between violence interruption workers. An example of a quote there is, when I see the pictures, it makes me feel like doing better, like making me shoot for an even higher goal. I post the pictures because they met some individuals from another Cure Violence site from another city. So there was this notion that people were posting to kind of say, wow, I'm showing people outside of my own site, outside of my neighborhood, what I'm doing. And then there was a lack of integration of the app into the existing work practices. So while we design technologies, thinking about how those technologies fit into our practices is really important. So somebody said, I mean, seriously, I think y'all should say that this is mandatory. It should be mandatory. This is from a person who they use the app highly, but not everybody on their site used it, and they wanted everyone to use it. So. And they felt like if it was integrated into their daily work, then they would use it more. So to summarize, when we asked the question about how useful the app was, of the people who used it, 100% said that they found it useful in the survey. The connect feature and the alert feature were the most popular features. In the training room, they did watch the training videos also. The connect feature, people said that it was good to support other sites and to connect with other sites. And then they said it would be more effective if there was additional training, if the daily logs, meaning their social practices, were built in, and if it was integrated into their work routine. So that's that project. So thinking about how do we go about designing technologies with local assets? One of the things that we learned, if we take a step back, is that we learned that you can design technologies with communities, right? And it can support violence prevention. One of the main things that we learned, though, is human capital is the most important thing in violence prevention, right? So who folks are, who they are, how they use their personalities, the people that they know, their connections, how they're able to negotiate, et cetera. So we're not saying that technology can never replace that at all. But it does support this information sharing across multiple sites. There's still this issue potentially of a lack of trust, not within each other, but with using other types of technologies, more like Facebook or any of those. They typically use that to find out what's happening, but never to post, because they would lose their own credibility, right? If they were to post things in that way. So that issue of trust is still there about using technology. So creating a technology that is internal to them was helpful for them, right? Because they knew it was just them that was on this site. And then this notion of creating a technology without integrating the social practices is really important, and it's almost more important than the technology that you create itself. So that's the first study. So the second study that we did was designing a socio-technology to address issues in STEM. And this project is with my collaborator at Northwestern, Nicole Pinkert, who created and founded the Digital Youth Network. She's a really close collaborator, and she helped lead this work. And this is with the Digital Youth Network and then the Technology for Social Good Lab. And it's sponsored by MacArthur, and NSF has given us funding to make this happen. So, switching gears a little bit, the percentage of computer science degrees awarded to women has steadily been declining, right? Despite many of our efforts to increase it. We all know this, right? We know that it really starts earlier than college, where women are beginning to make decisions about their participation in STEM. And it really is linked to prior experience that women have, their interests, and the sense of fit in community. And these decisions are made really early on, so before high school, typically. And so it's almost and we know that this interest starts with an initial situation, an opportunity to participate. What happens in that first experience, or those first experiences of out-of-school experiences that people have, and engaging in STEM. And it's important to make those things really clear. So, particularly in computer science or computing, it's not all experienced by, it's important to make sure that opportunities are there for computer science, since it's not experienced by all students, and not everyone has access to computer science and computer science education. And when girls typically come into those spaces, what they find are things like, lack of experience, a lack of confidence, but also negative stereotypes, right? They're confronted with that kind of a climate that is not welcoming per se, and this notion of there's this lack of role models or people that look like them. And so that's kind of this thing. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't there aren't opportunities out there who cater to this in particular. And it's nothing new. We all know this. We have Girls Who Code, we have Black Girls Code, we have all of these other organizations that have been addressing this, and particularly trying to find ways to engage and increase STEM participation amongst underrepresented populations and groups. And many of them are working to provide spaces that are effective and inclusive. So, but our approach was to understand not just how you create the technology or the curriculum, but how do you integrate all of that? And how do you think about the child, right, or the girl, and then all of the connections around them, the peers, the caring adults, the mentors, libraries, everything that they have access to, after school programs or out of school programs, etc. How do we make that connection over time? And so this work has one big question, which is how do we design socio-technical systems that leverage all of the assets that surround our students or our learners? So we created a program called the Digital Youth Divas program. And this program is particularly geared towards girls who do not have an interest in STEM. And for my colleague and myself, it becomes challenging because that's not necessarily a program that we would have joined per se, a program that has the words divas in it, right? Because I'm a math nerd and have been for a very long time. But we are specifically targeting girls who don't want to do STEM, and just to give them that exposure and allow them to make the decision of whether they want to or not. And so we target girls in the 4th and 5th grade, 6th grade. And so the project has 5 different components. There's project-based curriculum. The curriculum kind of looks like this, where you have a certain project, you have a mentor. A mentor is about a college-aged or a high school person. You go through a series of different projects. During class, they might give you a quick little instructions. Then you actually do the project. You have some online tools that are there to help you. And then you can take it home or do something at home, or et cetera, right? Share with your family. That's the thought around it. So here's some examples of project here. So the projects really focus on circuitry, computing, fashion, and design and fabrication. So this is a project of a wristwatch where the girls are learning circuitry, kind of like basic level electrical engineering type stuff, where when they close the class of the circuit, and when they close the class, the circuit closes and it lights up, right? And so they may be really interested in fashion or something else, which is who we're targeting in particular, and then they're also gaining some STEM skills. So the second component is narratives, and the narratives were written by a local author, and they're catered towards 4th and 5th grade, 6th grade girls. And it takes place in this like parallel digital divas club that's happening online. It's basically a book, and each chapter really focuses on a different character, and that character has different challenges and drama. The stories were co-designed with the students and the DYN staff and the authors. And it really does try to challenge mainstream representation of girls, as well as who is interested in STEM. And how you can use STEM. So those characters in particular have a focus on, they're not necessarily like great at math or anything like that, but they kind of challenge different stereotypes around who participates in STEM. And so we started with like sketches, and the girls kind of gave us their feedback. They gave us pretty harsh feedback, and sometimes you can read it at the bottom. And then we kind of evolved, right? We worked with artists and created, so we have a actual physical book that has different chapters. We also have a comic book, and we have animation. So, and I say animations, but very short videos and animated videos where the characters are acting out.
Throughout the classes, we give them these stories and narratives about STEM activities and how the characters in the stories, they use the activities. So Rashana's one of the main characters in our narrative. She's going to get help from her fellow digital youth divas.
She got this mysterious color note, and she's trying to decode what it means.
We're working on our color theory today, and that's what they're also doing in the story.
We got to decode it for her, and we got to talk to her on the website.
So within the story, they say, hey, Rashana did this. Well, if Rashana can take what she learned at her digital youth camp and put it within her work outside of camp, maybe we can do the same thing.
I'm going to try to make a card for our special days for people and use color and then explain it to them.
This week we helped out Rashana by making more lights and colors in her design.
Rashana's circuitry design has been stolen, and the divas have to help her out. So for them to mirror the story, they have to learn circuitry first.
I'm building a parallel circuit.
I'm making series circuit.
We show them the different components to make a working circuit.
If you understand it, it's pretty easy.
It's really cool because they're having a blast.
I like seeing things light up.
So that's what the narratives, that's the integration of the narratives. And so in addition to the narratives, we have an online learning network. You heard them talk about it a little bit. And that's where we created an online platform where it is actually from Nicole Spinker's work before this, which is iRemix, but it's situated on top of that, which is now EL3. And it actually is an online platform where the girls can have access to the narratives themselves. They have access to help materials and help tools, and also they can communicate back and forth. And so this is the platform here, and you see that the girls actually post their work And so this is an example of the narrative here and the girls kind of working in groups. And then what you see is now it's your turn to go from the narrative there. And you'll see like the adult mentor in the group sending a message, and the girl participating will respond back and say something, right? And so what we saw there was a lot of online engagement. So where the mentors who are in the room, they actually engage with the students throughout the week. So whether they're in Divas, which is an out of school program, whether they're there or not, or if they're at home and we see that they're working on it, we kind of engage with them during the week. You see students asking for help on homework. They talk about the collages that they have made. There's actually online interactions where the mentors are giving public feedback to the students. And then you see at the top right, students are giving feedback to each other, where you see positive feedback to each other about the different things that they've posted. And those are girls posting their work on the online platform. And then one of the things that we do with the narratives is that the character actually gives feedback too, where the character kind of, responds. So Jalen at the bottom here, Jayla is actually a character from one of the stories where they actually interact. So that was what the little girl was talking about. In addition, we have mentoring. That's a big component of it. Mentoring is you have mentor feedback and engagement, and they do that online. So the mentors are high school or college students, and they provide facilitation within the space, but also online. And then the last component is caring adults. So one of the things that we do is we provide ongoing messaging to parents and caring adults, guardians of the girls. There's weekly emails, there's online spaces for the girls to actually, the parents to actually talk about things. And then there's a showcase, and we do something called the DYD CAN, which is Digital Youth Network Caring Adult Network, where parents meet each other and they learn how to become learning brokers for their youth. And so that's an image of parents participating in one of our first DYD CAN parent workshops. That's what it kind of looks like. And during the parent workshops, parents are connected, they learn how to connect their youth to other programs outside of DYD CAN. So the goal is not for girls to just do our program. It was always for them to go and, to the program at the Chicago Architecture Foundation or another program, right? And so the goal was always to make that connection. And so that's one of the ways. So really quickly, the methods that we use to evaluate this. So this is over a course of like 3 years that we did this program. That it's still going on right now. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second. But we did a lot of community building. We did observations and interviews within the. We interviewed the girls. We interviewed parents. We did lots of observations, online ethnographies as well as in person. We did pre and post surveys and always did a knowledge assessment to see if the STEM concepts were sticking or not. And then again, like I said, online ethnographies, and then we did qualitative and quantitative analysis to see if the program itself was working. And so the results are, an increase in knowledge about STEM concepts with the girls. There's a shift in language when discussing STEM. We could see it, that they were changing how they talked about series circuits versus parallel circuits, et cetera. And then we saw this increase in interest, right? And a future outlook of, I still want to be a fashion designer, but I think I could actually use some of this. I think I could build my own site now, and I feel more confident doing that, right? And so that's kind of the overview of the findings there. But even more so interesting was the community that was built. The setting, the environment, what it looked like, what it felt like. And so the outcome was, these girls in these environments, very comfortable. And so I'm going to show you a really quick video and watch how focused these girls are on doing their tasks. This is just someone that comes in the back of the room like, what's happening here? And just videotaping it really quickly on the phone. But this is kind of what it looks like.
Let's make the night. You won't remember how we were one. You won't forget.
that was a real popular song that summer. But if you notice how focused they are, even though they're having fun and they're chatting with each other, they're still doing their work, and there's not one instructor or a mentor on top of them, like really pushing them to do it. They're just like doing the work and like in an environment they feel comfortable in. And they pick the music and they pick the song and they pick, they picked what they want to work on and et cetera, right? So that's kind of what the environments will look like. So we're super excited about this, right? We're excited about all the outcomes, but the one thing that we begin to think about we're always thinking about the challenges. What can we do better? And so what we see is we want to know, what we're looking for is how do we begin to translate this? So we saw lots of girls enjoy the Divas program. They loved it. They want to keep going, right? We have 2 years of programming. We probably could continue on a 3-year program. We have 2 years of curriculum, but we want them to go off and like go to high school and do some STEM or like go off into other programs, right? And so it was a challenge of translating their interest beyond Divas into other programs, and then measuring identity over time, meaning STEM identity, how much girls connect with STEM. That was also a challenge. And then trying to understand the long-term impact. Are they going on to do STEM in high school? Are they selecting those courses? And so by many standards, we should have been happy, right? More than 500 girls ran through the program. But our ultimate goal is to make a lasting impact and leverage the assets within a community to do that. And we know that in order to do that, it has to be situated within a community and it has to be owned, and we want to make sure that we leverage all of those assets and make those connections, right? And so that's one of the main things that we figured out. So then what we decided was to kind of come up with a new research question, which is how do we develop a sustainable STEM learning ecology? And so we embedded Divas, and we have Divas right now in all of the schools in District 65, which is Evanston, which is a north suburb right outside of Chicago, where Northwestern is, right? And it's great because we have lots of girls, but we still want to understand how do we get underrepresented girls. And so we started looking at things like, what's the environment like? What's the community like? What's the lived environment? How can we begin to leverage those things, right? And so does anybody know what this is? This is a map. So this is a map of Evanston. It's a map. It's a map of Evanston, but nobody knows what type of map it is. So in the 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., actually before then, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, something called redlining. Does anybody know what redlining is? It was where we had policies in place, informal and actual like formal laws in place that certain people had to live in certain areas, right? And we still see the reeling of inequality from these types of policies. So this is what a red line map looks like. This is an actual like red line map. And this is Evanston, and this is where the majority of the girls that we work with, they're in the red, right? And so when developers and banks used to decide on who could get loans and how much those loans would be worth and how much the interest rates were and where people could live, they would put certain people, depending on who they are and what they look like, and pretty much what they look like, right? Race was the main factor. They had to live in certain areas, right? And you weren't allowed to sell your home. You weren't allowed to buy homes outside of that. Banks wouldn't let you, right? And so here's kind of, so when we're in Evanston, we're doing this work and we're trying to figure out how to leverage the communities. And what we still see is that the majority of the communities live in a certain areas. And what ended up happening just historically is certain communities certain people live in a certain community, and then you would see, the city, not pouring in resources into certain areas. So all of this is very systematic in the structure, and we still see that reeling from today. And so here's some of the language that investors would see when they were trying to decide on if they could invest or not, right? It gives a description about the neighborhood. It gives it, and you can get this for like every part of Evanston, right? It gives a description about the neighborhood, and this particular part of the neighborhood where many of the girls where we're from, it says things like this, like there's a concentration of Negroes in Evanston is a quite serious problem for the town as they've been seeming to grow. So this is as people were deciding on how to invest, like large investors, how to invest, where to put businesses and where to put jobs and et cetera, they would see things like this, and then that would determine whether they would invest or not. So, and here's actually what the text looked like, because this is what the image looked like. And so as we're developing, as we think about how do we develop a sustainable, we have to think about how do we develop an equitable STEM learning system, right? And so what we see in places like Evanston is a fantastic school system, but then some people are not. Some parts of the community are not engaging with that, right? And so our goal is to try to develop a sustainable, equitable STEM learning ecosystem. But in order to do that, we have to understand the historical context. So we have to understand redlining, and we have to understand the structures that were in place, including the policies, so that we can design not just a program, because DIVAS is just a program, but how do we design a larger system, including policies and practices that create equity, right? In order to do that, we have to understand the history of it. So this is a new grant that we just received, and this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna connect, so we created an online platform that connects all of the organizations across Evanston, all of the out-of-school programs, whether they're sports or STEM or not, et cetera, and creating an ecosystem, right, where everybody could be connected, right, despite where you live, despite the policies that are there. And our goal is to try to understand what are the barriers that are still in place due to those policies, those historical policies, and then how can we overcome those barriers, right? So what are the things that are stopping people from participating? And a lot of that has to do with like local transportation, where transportation is, and how people can access these other programs. And so for the parents, we're going to create a caring network where we figure out how to engage them in a sustainable effort, right? A sustained effort to support their own girls' STEM participation. And then we're going to have for the girls a Diva Circle, which is a group of 5th to 8th grade girls who really participate in the programming. So we'll keep the programming, but it has to be connected to the larger parts, and part of that larger part is understanding that historical context, why there's some programming in some places, who doesn't have access, what's the impact of transportation. All of that comes from what I showed you before, right? And so that's where we're going with this. And so if you go back to that big question that I keep saying, which is how can we create an equitable STEM learning ecosystem, we have to think about what are some things that we can leverage within these communities. And so we're looking at, partnering with the Parks and Recreation in Evanston, and they've been great, and community colleges and local colleges that are there, Evanston, and we have students from the high school that are volunteering, and libraries and schools, all of them are helping to participate and try to address these inequities beyond just the Divas program, but make a bigger connection. And so churches, youth, all of that will have access to our online platform, but also are willing to engage in this social practice of creating an equitable and sustainable STEM learning ecosystem. So, to summarize my work, I've tried to understand, social issues, and that's really the crux of all of the things that I've done. But it's really clear to me, and it became clear to me early on as an early scholar and someone who builds technology, it's really not about the technologies. Technologies can't really address or even help social issues and local issues. But it really is recognizing the assets that are in these communities and building technologies that support and amplify those assets that already exist. So more plainly put, there's no savior in this work, right? So I can't come in and say, we're going to build something that's going to help. Instead, it's really working with the people on the ground that's already doing the work. It's really important. And so technologies can support what's already in place, leveraging the physical assets, including the institutions, the associations, and the individuals that are there. And as technologists, like for me as a technologist, someone who builds technologies and thinks about and designs them, we have this ability to take an asset-based approach where we focus on leveraging these existing assets. But we have to take into consideration the historical context. So us going into Evanston and putting divas in there and realizing that it's okay, but it's still not making the big impact that we want it to make, right? We want girls to go on and like do this at a larger level, and realizing that sometimes it's the historical context and injustices that were in place that are barriers, right? Like transportation and where people live and et cetera. And so we have to figure out ways that we can leverage technology in a way that supports getting around that. Yeah, and I think the last thing that I would want to say is that, you know, my background is in computer science, but I've recognized very quickly that as I'm doing this work, it's really important to bring in people from other fields like community psychology and sociology and critical race theory and all of those other folks who have been studying the social aspects much longer, so that we can understand how do we design these technologies to counterbalance structures that were made to maybe unconsciously or consciously create inequities, because that's the only way that we can design technologies that work. And with that, I'm going to say thank you guys for listening, and thank you so much for the wonderful participants who always let me in and to tell their stories and to spend time with them and participate, and all the girls who are in these videos. And then our funders, thanks to our funders for sponsoring this work. Any questions? Yeah.
So you're talking about assets, and I'm looking at what you're saying about assets are the people, basically.
Sometimes, yeah, and the things that are there, physical things that are there.
And okay, so that, you didn't seem to talk a lot about the physical stuff, and getting the people together is one thing, but how in the low income or those challenged communities, and I can think of one example where you have 60 children and maybe 15 or 20 computers between the 60 kids.
Yeah.
And then the other example that you had the kids all in a room there and they're all working hard, which is good. How did you get the room?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. That's a great question. So how do we, so one thing I didn't talk as much as about, you're right, which is about physical assets. So for example, like right now, Divas is in, we hold it in the local community. There's a building there that the city's been trying to sell and tear down and et cetera. So it's really, but it's a historical landmine that like means a lot. And most people would look at this building as being quote unquote like dilapidated or whatever, but it's a really important space for people, the kids as parents and their grandparents, and understanding that made us decide to put it there as opposed to just in the YMCA. We also have it in the YMCA too, but just, you know, that was really important. So leveraging things like that and taking account, mapping out what are those things that matter to folks in this community. And so like, that's an example. And I can talk more about like parks and how we've leveraged libraries and that sort of thing. And then the room there, what you saw there is, so of course, like institutions within these communities have spaces. And so how do you get that right? Like, so that space was actually a DePaul space. So they came to DePaul. That was when we were holding it downtown in Chicago. But I mean, for us, we partner with community organizations to get access to those spaces. Now, the technology is a different thing, right? And so that's kind of why I see the funders. So all of the girls had tablets because we provided tablets to them. But we have to think like, do you have Wi-Fi at home, right? And sometimes we provide that for them. Sometimes we'll pay for, provide, you know, wireless on the tablet so they could still do the work at home, et cetera. But that is something that part is a little bit challenging as far as like, we can provide the technology, but without providing, and we typically do provide the technology, but like there's only so far that we can go as far as like providing other things. So what we decided to do is that it's really important to provide the practices, social practices that should go along with using that technology, right? How the youth should use it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah,
More,
more or less.
Keep going.
You want me to keep going?
I know.
I will come back to it. Any other questions? So the question is the connect screen and the home screen two different screens? They are. So the home screen is like what they see on the first page, and it kind of hopes to prompt them into, every time they go to it, every day they see a new video, like a little quick video, and it rotates around, so they don't see the same thing every time, all the videos at the same time, but it also provides them with the statistics, et cetera. Now the connect feature is almost, think of it like a social media feature, specifically internal to the violence interruption program. So it's like a Instagram / Facebook / whatever social media tools that you can imagine, and they use it to post, and they use it to talk to each other, and they use it to really share the type of work that they're doing. So the question is what does the alert feature inform? And so the alert feature, so all of the interrupters are part of a team, and that's their site, right? And imagine that it's like if you're at work and it's 10 of you and you work together closely. And so the alert feature, if they press the alert button, then it would alert every person on their team where they are, the current location. So they sends them a text message where they are. And actually we added a robocall because they felt like it should be more. So it sends them a text message to say, X team member has requested help. This is their location. And then they can press a link and it automatically opens up Google Maps to show them exactly pinpoint the location on where they are. So it uses latitude and longitude to map exactly where they are. And it doesn't say any other details. We ended up adding in an opportunity for them to add, you see the screen, it says a box, so they can type in like what the problem is. But it works regardless of if you type anything in or not, because it has to be really fast. They may not have time. It just may be really something really quick and really a huge emergency. The question is what type of activity is the DIVAS program? It's an after school, out of school, after school. So we do it on Saturdays for 3 hours. I can't believe, every time I go there on Saturdays, they're there at like 9 o'clock, 8:30-ish, 9 o'clock, you can imagine. No 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old really wants to get up that early, but they're there. 9 to 12, and then we do after school programs too at the YMCA, and we have done 9 to 5, but that is during spring break, and then we do a couple sessions over the summer. So they might do 2 weeks camp, and they'll go through the whole. Instead of doing 20 weeks after school once a week, they'll do 5 days or 10 days, 2 weeks. 9 to 5 for 2 weeks during the summer.
And you don't allow boys?
Not that we don't allow boys, but no, we don't allow boys. It's for girls. It's an environment for them to be in. But I will say this, the Digital Youth Network, who created this, they have lots of programming for boys too. So, yes.
Something that we've kind of been discussing here at the college is, of course, the importance of STEM, but also the companion importance of liberal arts.
Yeah.
And that, so you understand the historical context for what you're doing, you should understand, develop good communication skills and so on. Is there any thought given to that in these programs?
Absolutely. We think about that all of the time. And so one of the things that we've incorporated is it's called DYD Circle. So they have circle time. And it really is important for them to talk about themselves, talk about identity, to kind of go over typically a social topic or a social issue, and think about that in detail. The program, during the first part of the program, what you saw was girls who are early in the program, and they're learning STEM concepts. And then that's year one. In year two, they actually have a lot more freedom, where we talk about their community and we talk about what are some of the issues in their community. And then they actually design their own problem. Well, they think about their problem, they go and do like research, and they're like, you know, research could be walking around, some of it could be looking online to find understanding other things, but they have to learn these other skills, talking to people, and then they design a tool, or they design something using those concepts that they learned in year one. And so that has given them a lot of agency. So an example of that is they had one project one year where, you know, they decided that it was really difficult for people who are visually impaired to walk across the street, and people aren't drivers aren't always cognizant of the issues. And so they designed a sensor that senses when the light turns red, and it, like your bracelet, if you were visually impaired, would vibrate to let you know that you can walk across the street. And it also has a light that you could attach to the actual light, the stoplight, to let you know that someone visually impaired and it connects is walking across the street. So be extra careful. It's just a little bright light that shines. This is something that we did not come up with as a problem, right? But they decided that this was a problem, and they spent 20 weeks doing this project, and they presented it at one of the Chicago Sky Games, which is the women's basketball team in Chicago, and they won second place for it. But it's something that, like, so it's like a social issue, but they had to go and do all the research and understand. They even like research sensors and et cetera. So it really took agency for them to do that. And do they care about sensors and et cetera? No. But they were really driven by the problem and the social problem and the social aspect of it. And I think they were also driven by the fact that it's their community and it's something that they could create. And it was this one particular light that was the problem, where people would cross into the crosswalk lane. So that's another example. And then they're patenting it. I just found out that they were patenting this thing that they created. It's just like amazing. So they're going to be like 12-year-olds with patents. I'm very proud of them. Thank you. Thank you guys for inviting me. Thank you.